I'm really excited to be here with you this morning, and I'd love to know a little bit more about who you are and where it is that you work or what kind of curriculum you're working with. So, are any of you with British curriculum schools or the national curriculum for England? Okay. CBSE? Yep. ICSE? IB? Okay, good. I was going to say, if you're actually at an IB school, it might not be the best fit because a lot of it is stuff that would be pretty familiar to you. But it's your call. Okay, great. Any other curricular areas? Yes? Yeah, totally. Yeah, no problem. Any other curricula? Okay, good. So what we're going to talk about today is project-based learning. There was an interesting study that came out from the OECD about 4 or 5 months ago where they took a look at different countries and the extent to which the teachers valued 21st century teaching and learning. And then they looked at the actual practice. So what happened on the implementation level. And teachers from the UK actually came around second or third in terms of valuing 21st century skills, which we build through project-based learning. But in actual practice, they were actually second or third from the bottom. So the question is, why this disconnect? Because I think we all will say we value the idea of STEAM education, we value the idea of project-based learning, but in reality, it can start to feel a little bit complicated. So what are some of the barriers that exist to project-based learning? Right, okay, so assessments, the tests that you might feel you need to teach for. Other thoughts on barriers and challenges?
The curriculum, since CBSE is a very, very heavy curriculum.
Yeah, content-heavy curriculum.
Finishing all that, what we have to finish.
Exactly.
So that sometimes becomes a barrier.
Yeah, and that would be the case with, curricula other than CBSE, but CBSE is particularly content-heavy. Any other barriers that you can think of?
Teachers are trained to actually deliver lessons one by one by one. I don't know many teachers who are now trained to develop a multi-disciplinary approach to learning.
Right, training.
If it's only one subject, I teach one subject, I deliver it this way, I don't look at it from all the other aspects that would come into it.
Yeah, so training is definitely a factor too. So when you're talking about project-based learning, we're going to explore an approach that integrates content, standards or outcomes, if you're in a standards or outcomes-based curriculum, but focuses on big questions and overarching themes and relevant hands-on multidisciplinary learning for the students. And creative hacks that some schools have used to make it a little bit more doable within their own environments. So this is a book that came out within the past year by David Perkins, who's a professor at Harvard's Graduate School of Education. It's a fantastic book. And one of the things that David Perkins writes a lot about is looking at the relevance gap. So in the US, we often talk about the achievement gap, how higher income students are outperforming by and large their lower income or minority peers in a lot of cases. And a lot of work has been done around addressing the achievement gap, looking at basic skills. And Perkins argues that while basic skills play a role, that a lot of the achievement gap actually has to do with relevance. That the super skills-heavy curricula that you're finding in some of the schools that are struggling is actually impeding the students by pushing them down content themes that don't feel particularly relevant in their lives. So he talks about assessing education from the standpoint of whether or not it's life-worthy. Does a project provide the opportunity for students to develop insight, to take action, to explore ethics, and then in terms of opportunity to engage outside of the school? So what I wanted to do, and I'm just going to check time to make sure that we can do the things that I wanted to do. What I wanted to do is actually spend some time actively working on this with projects that you're actually teaching in school. So I am going to bring around some chart paper, and if you have markers, great. If not, we have markers over here. And what I'd like you to do is, if you're sitting with somebody, and everybody is, maybe discuss between yourselves a particular topic that you're teaching. And then I'd like you to break out things that you could incorporate that would provide opportunities for the students to develop insights, take action, explore ethical questions, and then have opportunities to engage outside of school. So it might be that you're looking at, we'll say, butterfly life cycle, to give a primary example. What are the things that you could incorporate while still keeping in mind the content that you need that would provide these sorts of opportunities for your students? And we'll take just about 5 minutes to do that. Does that sound okay? Okay. So if you need a marker, feel free to come up and grab one. Otherwise, I will bring around some chart paper. Now's a great time to introduce yourself to the person sitting next to you. If you want to go up and grab chart paper too, you can do that. There's plenty up there. So Perkins talks about going beyond basic skills to developing 21st century skills and dispositions such as collaboration, going beyond traditional disciplines to hybrid themes like bioethics. I think that was a great example that we just had from Fit for Life. Going beyond discrete disciplines to interdisciplinary topics and problems. Going beyond regional matters to global perspectives. If we take insurance, for example, could you look at healthcare in different countries and the way healthcare is provided in different places? I'm from the US, which is a very complex place when it comes to healthcare. Beyond mastering content, to connecting content to life situations and productive action. I think that one's really interesting because content in project-based learning still has a place at the table. It's not about replacing content, it's about integrating content. And then going beyond prescribed content to learner choices and what to study. Again, you can still have specific skills you're focused on, but in this case, then the students can choose the avenues through which they want to develop those skills. So I want you to take about 4 minutes now with what you've already done on your paper and think about some of these beyonds. It's not likely in a single project that you would incorporate all of these, but which ones resonate with you and what are some of the opportunities or strategies you could use to move your topic beyond? Okay, so we'll do 4 minutes of that. All right, so how many of you are familiar with understanding by design? Okay, understanding by design is a framework for planning in project-based learning that works really well when you have a standards, outcomes-based, or content-driven curriculum. And it was developed by Grant Wiggins and Jay McTighe in the early 2000s. But it really focuses, I left the quotation marks off at the beginning, sorry about that. Really focuses on taking content and developing projects out of that content. I mean, I think in an ideal world, we would be able to say, I think this is a great project to do and work backwards to the content. But because many of you are coming from very content-heavy curriculum or curriculum areas or from an outcomes-based curriculum in the case of the national curriculum for England, Wales, and Northern Ireland, you have to consider the things that your students will be tested on and expected to know, and then work outwards into big questions and understandings. So to look at understanding by design, the challenge, which we talked about earlier, is finding time to teach all of the standards or all of the content and maintain rigor. So teaching in a way that's deep, not just for coverage, making lessons meaningful, and engaging students in the learning process. I'll give you an example, actually. Last week, I visited a school alternative in Boston, and in this school, the students actually decide what to study completely on their own, and then the teachers plan the lessons to support their interests. It's very sort of Reggio Emilia based. And I was talking about it with my husband about 2 days ago, and he said, but how do they learn everything they need to know? And I said, well, I think the question is, when we're covering topics, are the students actually learning anything? And I always use the examples of polynomials. I know at some point I was taught polynomials. I know at some point I passed a test on polynomials, but I'm pretty sure I never really learned anything about polynomials. but it feels great to say polynomial. Oops, back up. Oh no, what happened? All right. Current slide. All right, so understanding by design happens in 3 stages. There we go. So identifying the desired results, and here balancing skills and content. What are the skills that you're trying to teach the students? What content do you need to teach the students? And beginning with that, ideally from multiple disciplines. And then moving on to the big ideas. What are the big ideas that surround this content? And then looking at essential questions. This is in the first stage. What are the big questions that exist around that content? Stage 2 is determining acceptable evidence. So what is it that you'll be looking for the students to do in order to show that they both know and understand what you've taught them? And then planning the learning experiences and the instruction, ensuring that you've incorporated the desired results in the acceptable evidence. So let's just take UAE social studies as an example. What's something that you might study in year 7 in UAE social studies?
About the 7 Emirates.
Okay, the 7 Emirates.
The Constitution.
Okay. All right, so let's take the UAE's constitution. So the content is pretty clear there, right? You need to know about the UAE's constitution. What are the details in it? When was it developed? How is it enacted? But what are some of the skills that you could have students develop at the same time that they're learning about the UAE's constitution?
Research and observing skills.
Okay, research, observation.
The kind of critical thinking, they have a little bit related to what see and kind of evaluate it.
Okay, critical thinking, evaluation. Other skills?
By knowing the facts and figures of UAE, they come to know the numericals, like when we go into the population,
Right.
and the area.
And that would be great for the content, so the content that they need to know. Other skills? Interviewing, potentially. Right, and that really is for you to say, based on your year 7 program or 6th grade program at your school, what skills do you want your students to have? But then what are some of the big understandings that you might pull out of this? If we think about learning about the UAE Constitution, what are some of the broader understandings that might relate to that?
The rights and the responsibilities
Okay.
of citizens.
What are rights and responsibilities? What is it to be a citizen?
Sort of how countries have formed, the basic building blocks of a
Basic building blocks of a country. Sorry, there's no clicker, so I keep moving back and forth here. So those big ideas, like we were just talking about, provide a lens for prioritizing. I'm not going to read this off, but you can take a look at it. I think you have a really good sense of big ideas. And then the essential questions. We talked about this a little bit. Oops. That's the problem. I think I keep hitting end. All right, hold on. So here are some sample essential questions. What are some essential questions you might have for your students about the UAE's constitution? Sometimes essential questions are specific to the topic, sometimes they're general.
For example, who wrote it, let's say, or how was it formed?
Okay. Those are sort of content-oriented questions. What are some of the bigger questions that would be universally important to the students? With the big ideas, you kind of got to some of this. It's really about just posing it as a question.
What about the one you've got at the bottom? What is the government's proper role?
What is the government's proper role? That's an excellent one. Any other thoughts?
How is democracy different from the country?
Okay. How is democracy different in different places? That's interesting.
what is the system they're following?
Okay. What are systems like in different places? How do systems vary? Can different systems be effective? I also love the question here. These are not my questions, by the way, but to what extent is geography destiny? So then it's about collecting evidence. What are the things that you want the students to be able to do to show that they have learned what you want them to learn and are able to do what you want them to be able to do? So what are some ways that you might gather evidence of your students' learning in this case? And actually, let me go to the next slide because this gives sort of a framework for thinking about that. David Perkins also talks about evidence or assessment in 3 buckets, and he talks about evidence that we can count, tests, quizzes, evidence that we can see, what do we observe our students doing, and evidence that we can hear, what sort of oral feedback helps inform our understanding of our students. So this is a continuum of assessments from UBD, starting with informal checks for understanding, observations and dialogues, tests and quizzes, academic prompts and performance tasks. What are some ways you might document some of the things other than tests and quizzes? What are some things you might have students do to show their understanding?
Debate about a given topic.
Great, so debate is a wonderful example of evidence that you can hear. Presentations made by the students. Other ideas?
They can conduct a quiz amongst themselves
Okay,
to check the knowledge of their peers.
right. And it's about having a diverse range of assessments. Other thoughts? All right, so I'm going to show you.
They can also write their reflections on whatever they have understood from the whole concept.
Okay, they can write reflections. So this is a rubric that I came across recently. It was developed by Kathy Hirsch-Pasek, who's the head of the Center for the Developing Child in Philadelphia. And many of you have probably seen the 4 C's developed by P21. But what Hirsch-Pasek has done is added in content and competence. And I think given the conversations that we're having in schools around grit and character, it's really important to consider competence as a factor. But I think bringing content back into the conversation makes it much more connected to what actually happens in our schools. So most of what we do in assessment traditionally falls under level 1, level 2, and level 3 of content. This, by the way, is just one example of a way that you could assess students' engagement in project-based learning. But it rarely goes to level 4, the expert level. And by adding in collaboration, communication, critical thinking, creative innovation, and confidence, you could actually see a much richer picture of where a student has gone over the course of a particular unit or project. And again, this is just one example. It doesn't take the place necessarily of other forms of assessment. But it might be that you wanted to include a disposition to engaging with nature, as we talked about in the example of the butterfly. It might be that you replace something in this, or that's something that you add to a rubric that's like this. Rubrics are a great way of assessing in project-based learning. They don't have to be super complex. And there are some great resources online for developing rubrics. I have a list of them here, so when you leave, you can grab those. Rubistar is actually a free website where you can kind of plug content and skills in, and it will generate a rubric that you can then adapt. I've rarely found that the Rubistar rubrics are exactly what you want, but sometimes it's great to have a starting place. So then it's developing learning experiences. And this is where I think we really get to the life-worthy and beyond learning. We're not going to do a case study, but these are some great resources for life-worthy learning. So the BIE is the Buck Institute for Education. They have some wonderful projects. It's a repository for teachers' projects on project-based learning. It is a little US-centric, but there are some really great ideas that you can pull out of it that would be appropriate for pretty much any classroom context here. And they also have partners such as NASA, so some really wonderful real-world connections. The projects do have Common Core alignment, but if you teach at a National Curriculum of England school, Common Core is very easy to connect to the national curriculum, less so with CBSE. but you can incorporate your own content with it. Iron.org is a website that has multidisciplinary projects online that engage students from around the world, and they're linked to the UN Sustainable Development Goals. DIY.org is not for project-based learning, but it's an amazing project website that has some really interesting things for students to be able to do. If you get to the stage where you can actually incorporate more student choice with project-based learning, DIY.org is a great place to let students go to actually develop their own projects. And there's some wonderful partners with DIY.org, like IDEO. You can get different badges using it, and you can get like a design thinking badge with IDEO, you can get a philosophy badge, you can get an Archer badge. But if you're looking for project ideas to incorporate into ways of showing understanding, it's a great resource. And then Out of Eat and Learn is an expeditionary learning project that is global and was developed by Harvard's Project Zero. They usually take schools in cohorts in different cycles, but there are 3 GEM schools that are participating in it now, and it's been a great sort of life-worthy learning experience for these schools. So scheduling and staffing can be a barrier sometimes with project-based learning. And some of the hacks that schools I've worked with have used to create space, physical space and staffing space for project-based learning have included shortening classes to add additional time periods in. There are schools that I work with that wanted to add in Genius Hour. In fact, one of them will be presenting later today, and so they shortened their classes to create a block at the end of their week for Genius Hour. Combining classes, so saying we're going to have a block of 2 subjects, but in those 2 subjects we'll be teaching ICT, math, and science, which creates more space in the curriculum, or we'll be teaching social studies and ICT. Increasing class size. This is a tricky one, but it's also totally doable. If you have say 150 students in 5 classes of 30 each in 6th grade, you can actually increase the class sizes to about 37 so that you can split the students up in different configurations, free up a teacher, and actually physically free up a classroom space to be a center for project-based learning. It takes a lot of planning, but it's an interesting approach that some schools have tried. And then prototyping and testing. Taking the smallest piece of what you've learned, trying it out, collecting some data on it, seeing what works, and then scaling it out to other schools. The work that some of the schools have done with Genius Hour has been a great example of that. One example of prototyping and testing that I love. Oh, we're out of time? Oh no, all right, so I'll just quickly tell you this one. One of the schools wanted to trial using whiteboard paint to develop a more expressive classroom environment, so they bought enough whiteboard paint for 3 classrooms, and they had the teachers write applications to pitch for paint, so that they had to have an actual plan behind what they were going to use their whiteboard walls for. They were able to then collect data on the way the classrooms changed student engagement, and were able to make the case then for buying more whiteboard paint for the walls. So just a quick example. I guess we're out of time, which means that we don't have time for Q&A, but the handouts are up here. Please help yourselves. And I'll write my contact details up here. If you have any questions, feel free to email me or send them to me on Twitter if you want.